Hello, everybody. This is John Bell, and this is the Harbinger Report. And I hate to break it to everybody, but we've already done half the show just talking before the show even started. But I have a fantastic guest for y'all today, and I'm extremely honored that he would grace us with his presence. He's a legend in the field that the subjects that we talk about. I've seen him before in conference and spoken with him. I've bought books, videos at those conferences, and they've been a big influence on me in my life. And without further ado, the great L.A. Marzulli.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the kind words. I really do.
I do want to give an update to the audience. My last show, episode 7, which was with Skiba News Nation, which was a fantastic show we did. Those guys are great. Go check them out. That show was canceled, removed from YouTube because of me going into, I guess, too much on the guidelines of health issues that we're, not allowed to talk about in the new communist system. That's not American. So I just want to let y'all know I am going to be reposting that. What it's going to do is I'm going to start posting my material on other channels and other platforms and other sites. So I'm going to put that there. And as I told y'all last time, I'm joining a group of new guys starting up called the Paladin Network or the Paladin Roundtable. And these are veterans that are coming together to produce content and pull everybody together and try to promote Christ at the same time. So they're all unified in that as soldiers and warriors. So I'll be posting links to that site, and eventually I'm going to repost episode 7 to that website when I have the time to be able to get to that. But without further ado, we've got L.A. Marzulli here. L.A. Marzulli is a researcher. He's an author. He's a filmmaker. He's been on many podcasts, videos, interviews. He was on Coast to Coast AM, which for me is like the pinnacle. I grew up listening to Art Bell back in the day, and that's where I first came across Stephen Quayle, and that's where I first started hearing about the Giants and stuff like that. And then later on, over the years, listening to Stephen Quayle, listening to Tom Horn, who sadly has passed away relatively recently. What was it, last September? I believe it was.
Yeah, a couple
but I absolutely love Tom Horn. I mean, just love that man. And when I went to one of the conferences, I was able to sit right behind him. I was so excited just to be near him. But anyway, LA, just for anyone, most of my fans, I'm sure would recognize you. You're an icon in this field. But for anyone who might not know you or be new to these kind of channels, do you mind just giving a short bio on yourself and explain how you got into this field?
Yeah, I'm L.A. Marzulli. I've written 13 and a half books. The reason why I say half is because number 14 is getting close to being finished. We've got 10 chapters done, and I think there's about 7 or 8 more to go. So we're over halfway, and we're excited about that. So there's also 30 films in our stable, lack of a better word. There's 2 films on the Fatima apparitions. There's 11 films, Watchers DVD, that series. the On the Trail of Nephilim. There's 8 films there, and the whole burgeoning UFO phenomena. There's 8 films now. 9 and 10 will be released. They're done, basically. They'll be released sometime in probably late March, the way we're going. And yeah, there you go. On the Trail of Nephilim. So, I mean, that's what I do. I have my own podcast on YouTube. I do 5 shows every week, Monday through Friday. I appear in all sorts of media. And I'm also on the Trail of Nephilim. We get out of a library. We sort of pride ourselves in getting out of a library. So we actually go to these places. We film there. We talk to archaeologists, anthropologists, stonemasons, just a variety of witnesses, experts, people, all walks of life, all different disciplines, to try to get people's interest that there's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. So that's just a little about what we do.
That's it. It's an absolutely hidden mystery, and not just on even like a government or a society level, but even in the church. I mean, amongst Protestants and Catholics, theologians do not tackle the subject of the pre-flood times or the giants, even though it's all clearly there if you read and do a careful examination of the Bible.
I certainly agree. The book that changed my life was by Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, The Omega Conspiracy. And in that book, he really opens up the Genesis 6 scenario. Gary Stearman's the one that opened up the Genesis 3:15 narrative, which really, in my opinion, is the gateway to the rest of the biblical prophetic narrative. If we don't understand Genesis 3:15, we don't understand what we're reading throughout the rest of Scripture, because it is a seed war. The seed of the dragon will be at war, at enmity with the seed of the woman. The seed of the woman, the one coming from her, the proto-evangelium, the Messiah, will crush the dragon's head. That's the Bible. That's right. The whole Bible right there. 3 chapters later, it explodes in the Genesis 6 narrative. When the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, they took wives from whoever they chose, went into them. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. Moses is writing this thousands of years after the flood. So what we're looking at, this isn't the same incursion in the days of Noah. This is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, who knows how many incursions. And where does Jesus go when he dies? Remember, this is unbelievable to think about. And I've been traveling in this for well over a year. He is the head of the body of the church. He is the firstborn of the dead, so that he may be preeminent in all things. Wait, stop right there. The firstborn of the dead? I mean, God dies? I mean, what? And this is something that the enemy, the dragon, Satan, never got his head around. He figured, well, you can't kill God. How's this going to work, right? And he doesn't understand the cross. He's figuring, well, he'll just come back down and, blah, blah, blah. No, the body's in the tomb. He's dead. The spirit and the soul go down to where? They go down to Tartarus. Peter tells us this. The gloomy dungeons where the chained spirits of the fallen angels that sin, Jude tells us exactly what's happening. The angels of sin, find themselves in gloomy dungeons. They left their first estate. This reflects Genesis 6 and, of course, the predecessor to that, Genesis 3:15. So then Jesus unites with his body, okay? His spirit and his soul find their way back into that tomb, and then Father comes in, and that body levitates. It's a singularity. And that's where the Shroud of Turin comes in my opinion. The Shroud of Turin is forensic proof of the resurrection. It's never been duplicated. It never will be. And that shroud is 2,000 years old. And the pollen that's in it, of course, it's all been cleaned. Don't even get me going down that road. But when before they cleaned the shroud, gee, I wonder who figured that out, to completely forego any forensic investigation for generations to come. They discovered pollen that's only indigenous in and around Jerusalem and at a certain time. So, in my opinion, the shroud is God's calling card. It's forensic evidence of the greatest event in human history, the resurrection. It bears the shroud is a piece of linen, about 3.5 feet wide, 13 feet tall, and it bears the frontal and dorsal image of a crucified man in repose, in rigor mortis. The scourging is incredibly brutal. Part of his beard has been plucked out. He's been hit here. His nose is broken. It's a helmet, not a crown. It's a helmet of thorns, which has been pounded into his head. There's that wound in the really big, and the wound in the side. There's Billy Rubin. There's water and blood coming out of that wound. The nails go through the palm and come out the wrist, so they're at an angle like this. They're not in the palm here. They're here and then go at that kind of an angle. So they actually go in here and come out here in the wrist. That enables them to pin him to the cross. It's not, if you put it in the palm, he's just going to tear it out.
The weight would just rip out. There's nothing here to support it in the hand, right? It would have to be.
It's so brutal. I mean, when they finally put the cross in the hole, and they do that deliberately because it jerks the whole body. I mean, he's being tortured, and everybody's figuring he's going to come down. I mean, you got to figure Mary's sitting there going, "Okay, I know who you are." Nobody gets the cross. Nobody gets it. He dies. They're all going like, "What just happened? Why is he dead?" They don't understand it. Nobody understands it. Nobody. And he becomes death. God becomes death for us because he's the firstborn of the dead. And that resurrection from the tomb, in my opinion, is the type of rapture. He's the firstborn from the dead. That's the rapture. He's showing us what we're going. The dead in Christ will rise first. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and the trump of God. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up. That's harpazo. That's where we get rapture from. Caught up together with those in the clouds to greet the Lord in the air, and forevermore will be with him. I mean, that's my blessed hope, because you can't fix this anymore. And I would throw over to you, John, that we might be in the window of time where we might be going up soon. Don't know yet, not setting a date, not doing that. But you got to admit, with what's going on this planet right now, right, makes me wonder.
Well, yeah. Being Catholic, I've got a different view on the rapture, but however God decides to deal with it, I'm there. And that said, yeah, I definitely believe. I believe we're out of the great apostasy, and that we're entering the time of tribulation, and we're entering the book of Revelation, and we're starting to see these events take place. Like, for example, look at the prophecy of the Euphrates River drying up and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse essentially being released. And scholars agree that the pale rider is the Antichrist. And it's all talking about war, pestilence, famine, whereas
sure we are. But we differ slightly. I think we're in the birth pains. We're definitely heading up to the tribulation, but we're not in the tribulation yet. Right. The tribulation is the wrath of God. It's like, you don't want to be here for that. But these are the birth pains. We both agree that you can't fix this anymore, and we're headed headlong into something. The time of Jacob's trouble, which deals with the nation of Israel. It's a time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob, Israel.
Yep. Isaiah 13 talks about, when Jesus got up to read the scroll, when he started his public ministry, and he read from Isaiah 61, at the end of it, he reads and to declare the year of the Lord's favor, and stops, because that's the year of declaring the good news. Right. Man is reconciled unto God, right? But he stops before the next line, which is to declare the terrible day of the Lord's coming.
Yep.
Also
known
as
so deliberate. That is just so deliberate,
because it has another time when it's going to be fulfilled, and that's the time we're entering now.
I agree. I think we're entering into it. Students of biblical prophecy, keep your eye on the Middle East, because that's where it's going to come down, and we'll see.
People ask, where is it going to start? The Middle East.
Right there. Middle East.
The Middle East. Don't worry about. It's not going to start with the war with Russia. It's going to start out of the Middle East. That's why I was telling people relax when all this tension was going on with the Ukraine and Russia, which is really bad. But once things started kicking off in the Middle East, I said, now it's time to get ready.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but one thing's for sure, we're living in a time of high biblical prophecy, and that's why I try to do this show. And that's why the little symbol I have is the Grim Reaper is supposed to be one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the Harbinger, like with Jonathan Kahn, about just trying to get the message out to what's coming. It's a prophetical message, and the prophetical message is get ready, because these events that have been prophesized for thousands of years are now getting ready to start taking place.
I agree completely. I 100% agree with you. It'd be very interesting. The thing to watch is when, not if, when Israel full blown goes into Hezbollah, goes into Lebanon, and it will do that, has to. So the question is, does that draw Iran in? Does it draw Turkey in? Does it draw Russia in? Recently, there was a photograph, which I discovered in my daily musings on the net. It showed Putin from Russia, Erdogan from Turkey, and Khamenei from Iran. Those are the three leading nations in the Ezekiel 38 prophecy. Those of us who look at this are wondering whether we're looking at Ezekiel 38, 39. We don't know yet, but it's the players are on the stage. There's no doubt about it. So we have to wait and see.
Right. Yeah, I tell you, I tell people it's going to be anything but boring. That's for sure. But also, with these times, you have to look at the coming of everything right now in the world is the coming of a one world government. It's coming with a digital ID, social credit score, and of course, all that we know leads to the mark of the beast. And I try to tell Christians, you cannot function in society and what's coming without taking that mark of the beast.
Yeah, it's total enslavement. It's entrapment. In one of my books, I forget which one it is. I think it might be Counter Move, but whatever. I talk about the mark of the beast. Actually, I think it's in the Cosmic Chess Match, but it doesn't matter. But what I put forth is that there's the only time in the entire biblical prophetic narrative where God shows where there's an absence of grace and mercy, where the Lord just doesn't show any grace or mercy, or where the Nephilim are present. The Nephilim are the progeny of fallen angels and the women of earth, human women of earth, creating a hybrid being known as the Nephilim. In some cases, they were giants. I get that, not all cases, but in many cases they were. And there are many different tribes. The Zanzumim, the buzzing ones, the Anakim, the long necks, the Rephaim, basically the dead, the Nephilim. So there seems to be different genetic characteristics for these tribes. All of these guys, no grace and mercy at all with them. And if you take the mark, in my opinion, it's a DNA changer. You take the mark of the beast, it will change your DNA, and you will become a modern day Nephilim. You're taking on the genetic characteristics of the dragon himself. Conjecture? Maybe, but it's based on we're taking out these implants. We've looked at them under a scanning electron microscope. So this isn't just, sitting in a library reading about this. This is getting a guy who's been abducted numerous times, taking the implant out, going to SEAL Lab, looking at the implant and figuring out, wow, what am I looking at here? I believe that the implants are the prototypes for the mark of the beast. That's what I think they are.
So since you brought that up, what are some of the characteristics that they observed under laboratory conditions for those implants?
They were made out of meteorite metal, not in all cases, but in many cases. In some of the latter ones, there seems to be double-walled nanotubes, carbon nanotubes, double-walled carbon nanotubes inside the enclosure. Number 16 that Dr. Roger Lear took out, ours was the last one he did, number 17. But number 16, you could not cut it with a diamond blade saw. You had to take it to a laboratory and bust it open with a laser. The one we took out, number 17, was about 40 years old. So we could cut it very easily with a razor blade. There's a progression with these things. There's no doubt about it. There's a progression. And we feel that whoever's doing this has spent an inordinate amount of resources, time into this project. And I believe these are the prototypes. We've talked to abductees who have had implants in their forehead. What does that sound like? Back of their hand, but also in other places on their bodies. So I'm not saying it is, but it just might be.
Well, I'll tell you a wild story I don't normally say publicly. I kind of keep it to myself just because it's crazy. But when I was a kid, I grew up in a military family. When I was a kid, I've got these very strange memories of being in DUMBs, the deep underground bases, right? And being put into sensory deprivation tanks for long periods of time and lots of different testing, et cetera, et cetera. One day I had a guy contact me that says, John, man, I've got this information about programs and stuff you were involved in that you might not even be aware of. And I thought this guy was just trying to tell me stuff he thought I might want to hear, right? So I took it with a grain of salt, and I thought this guy was just full of whatever. And then finally he tells me, he says, by the way, so he says he had access to like this information in this computer system. He says, okay, so this tells me that you have these implants in you. And I'm like, whatever, I don't have any implants or anything. He says, well, this is telling me that you've got pain in two parts of your body, a sharp pain. And he named two exact spots that I was struggling with sharp pain from. And he says, and I still was like, this guy's full of, I don't know how he could have guessed that. And I did in those two spots. And I never told anyone, not even a doctor, that I was struggling with sharp pain in those spots. He says, I can go in the computer and turn those chips off. He says, and the pain will stop. And I'm like, well, I was like, whatever. I couldn't process that. And, but sure enough, he said he turned it off the next day. I never had that pain again in either spot. So that blew me away. And it blew me away. And then I started listening more to some of the other stuff he was telling me. And then I've had two other sources later that confirmed similar information. So out of the blue. So that people don't have a concept of the high level of craziness that goes on in our world today. You know, and well, quote I use from I have a degree in philosophy, and a quote I use from Plato all the time is, you can't know what you don't already know. And what that means is the way the human brain processes information, that we have to break things down in a compartmentalization to understand it, right? So if your brain comes across something that it doesn't know is real knowledge, it doesn't know how to accept that or assimilate it. That's why he says you can't know what you don't already know. We have to have a breakdown of process to understand things. So if we're told growing up and in society and everything that, oh, aliens aren't real, this isn't real, that's not real, then it can be very psychologically difficult for people to understand, accept, or come to believe those things.
And that would be cognitive dissonance. That's where, there's nothing in someone's grid system to prepare them from what they're looking at. Right. Controversial here, but in our film Fatima, we did 2 films on it. We went to Fatima and we discovered a completely different Fatima than what most people know. That's what we did. Deep dive, talking to people that have spent decades researching from the handwritten records of Father Fierro, who was basically the guy who was keeping track of what's going on here. People had nothing in their grid system for any type of aerial phenomenon in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal. So it wasn't the sun that moved, it was something else, in our opinion. And I'll send you those 2 films, so you can, I think, because I know what the official narrative is. We discovered something completely different. And we discovered a photograph that had been hidden away in the archives for, almost 100 years, right? A little under 100. And then this professor of semiotics, Jose Machado, gained access to the Fatima archives. No one knew where the photographs were. These were the original glass plates from Joshua Benoliel, who was the photographer who was out in the field of Fatima. So he comes on record, not Joshua Benoliel, but Jose Machado comes on record telling us there's problems in these photographs. We have really big problems. The powers that be would not allow him to publish. Let me put it this way: out of the 12 photographs that were taken, he could only do about 3. The one that we used in the film clearly shows a disc-like object directly over the apparition site. I mean, it's like plain as day. And we grill them. We go, hey, you know, you're a professor of semiotics. Could this be a chemical burn? Is it a scratch? He goes, no. Whatever this is embedded in the glass plate. It's the original photograph. And what's really weird is there's this smoke that rises up like this, and then it makes a right angle turn, and then right here, boom, the disc. And we show that in the film. I mean, we're the people that, like you talked about Kandahar Giant, you know, we broke that story. Well, we broke this story about Fatima. And in our opinion, it was a UFO event, plain and simple.
I've seen the part in part, probably not the whole thing, but I've seen the miracle of Fatima with the sun with other people when I was at an apparition site. And the same thing, what I saw.
Which one? Which apparition?
This was in Medjugorje, in Yugoslavia.
Okay. Yeah, I know where that is. Yeah.
And I've been there 3 times, and that's where I had my conversion story happen there. And when I came outside from praying in the church, and these people were like, "Oh my God, look at the sun! Oh my God, look at the sun!" And so I looked up, and sure enough, I saw the sun. I saw it pulsating, and I saw a disc in front of it, and it didn't bother your eyes at all to see it. And I saw a disc in front of it, and it was dancing around and getting bigger and smaller and pulsating, and then it stopped. But everyone saw it, and that was a common thing to see there. I only saw it one time. But I clearly remember every bit of it, and I wasn't the only person. I've also been with people on 2 occasions when I've seen UFOs.
Yeah, and the question is, I mean, this is why we did the film on Fatima. Okay, so you see an object in the sun that's pulsing. That's what they do. That you see it, and in the original Fatima handwritten letters by Father Fiera, the parish priest at Fatima, witnesses, men of letters, lawyers, doctors, reported, I looked up and saw a dull silver disc. That's actually in the archives. I mean, it's in the handwritten. So in my opinion, no disrespect to Mary of the Bible, this has nothing to do with Mary. This is something completely different. This is a phenomena that basically fooled the 70,000 people in Fatima. They're looking at something. I call it a harbinger of deception. And then we show all these other so-called sun miracles from all around the world since 1917.
Well, aside from what took place there, what I focus on more from a Catholic side is the writings from like Sister Lucia and the things that she warned with
You
those.
really want to go there?
Actually, I don't. Right? No, I want to go to
okay, all right, yeah.
I want to go to
maybe that's a private conversation. I did a deep dive on that.
I'd love that opportunity,
okay.
but yeah, we'll be too different on those lines, just because.
And that's okay. We're still brothers in the Lord.
Oh, amen to that. Amen.
That's what we want.
Absolutely. And that's the thing too. Like, we talked about even before the show, the cancel culture of today. We don't always have to agree on everything to still have fellowship. It's the things that unite us that's more important than anything we could disagree on. And we're united in Christ and wanting to love and serve God.
We're united in Jesus, right?
That's it. And obey His commandments and have love for His people. I mean, and the salvation of souls. I mean, those are the things that are critical. And I've got fellowship with anybody who believes those things, and that all human life has value. All human life, whatever religion they believe or whatever. And I can tell you this from a Catholic standpoint, not only do I disagree with a lot of things going on in the Catholic Church, especially Francis, but that said, I've got Protestant friends that put Catholics to shame. I mean, complete shame. I've got one of the holiest people I've ever met is a Protestant friend of mine. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to embarrass him or give him away, but is a Protestant friend of mine that I met when I was working in Hollywood. And to this day, we've stayed in touch. And the guy's just a super amazing person. He calls me to pray often, and just blows me away, this man. Now, on the same side, I know very holy Catholic guys too. And I'll give you one example. Are you familiar with that movie that just came out recently, Sound of Freedom?
No, I'm not.
That was with Jim Caviezel.
Okay.
And I worked for Jim Caviezel's manager, and when I was in Hollywood. But Jim Caviezel did a story about a U.S. Navy SEAL where they came across trafficking across the border. All right, and so they made this film about that. Well, a buddy of mine that made that film, we got to be friends in Hollywood and Los Angeles, and he's running for president of Mexico. He is a very, very holy person, and blows my mind when I'm with him how authentically holy this guy is. And amongst my friends, I tend to edify my friends a lot of times when it comes to like theological issues and stuff. But whenever I'm around this guy, oh, he constantly is like, or not constantly, but often he's like, John, this, and I'm like, man, he's right. It's like I didn't think of it that way, or stuff I spent years studying in college to understand. He just knows it without having any study whatsoever, just because he's there. You know what I'm saying? It's like in the Old Testament. I'm blown away by theologians we look back to, or church fathers in the first century. They didn't have this much of the education that we have today, yet their understanding of theology, of God and the world would just bam. I mean, it's like we are nothing compared to what those guys were. It's just amazing. And I think there was a special grace in the early Pentecost of getting things out, and I'm hoping for a new Pentecost where we see that return, right? So, but we also know, one of my professors said this. He said, Professor Dr. Scott Hahn, he said, if we don't have a major persecution against Christianity and Christians, he says, then we do not have a just nor loving God. He says, because that is the medicine that we require, the medicine that we need. And if you look at salvation history, God always uses his enemies to punish his own people when they transgress. And it's like, one time I felt like the Lord told me, he says, here's salvation history in a nutshell. One, man turns his back against God. And two, God allows man to be left to his own devices, which always leads to self-destruction and imprisonment and slavery. And then under that imprisonment and slavery, they get humbled and turn back to God. God saves man. Whole story of salvation history just repeating itself over and over. And now we're facing the same thing. We've come to the same return of evil, and we're going to face the same level of punishments. And in fact, there was one contemporary saint, Saint Padre Pio. He said,
right.
Yeah, sure. He was amazing. By the way, did you know he had like the wounds of Christ?
Big matter, yeah. But I've got a different take on
sure
matter with Padre Pio.
Sure, I never met him. I never met him, but I was very fortunate to know many, and the stories they tell are amazing. Yeah. But he said one time that God first destroyed the earth with water, and he says he will do it a second time with fire. And that's also shown in Isaiah 13 and reiterated in Malachi chapter 4. But yeah, Padre, I'll tell you one story about Padre Pio. When I was in my university, there were two beautiful young women. They were sisters in our classroom. Their parents met through Padre Pio, and their father approached Padre Pio back in the day, and he tried to speak to him, and he wouldn't speak to him because he was in a hurry. But he grabs his hand and he says, "Come here, follow me." And he took him across the church, and there's this little woman praying, and he says, "Excuse me," and the woman looks up. He grabs the woman's hand, he grabs the man's hand, he puts them together, and he says, "You two are going to get married, and you're going to have two beautiful daughters." And sure enough, they ended up getting married and had two beautiful daughters.
Wow.
And it was just a beautiful story. I've heard thousands of stories, even ones by doctors and stuff like that are in the Vatican that to assess different claims of miracles and that kind of stuff. But getting back to the topic, we can go off on different subjects of theology like forever. It's my favorite subject is to talk about God and theology. But so you mentioned before about you're covering basically Chuck Missler. I believe he one time. I'm a big fan of Chuck Missler. Just a tremendous heart for loving God and an amazing pastor. I believe he said one time, if I remember correctly, that he called the Book of Enoch the Rosetta Stone for understanding the Bible. Is that correct?
I don't know. I've never heard that quote attributed to Chuck, but I will say this: the Book of Enoch. If you were going to keep one book out of people's hands, that's the book you keep out. Why? Because it tells you exactly what's going on. I mean,
Right.
verbatim. It makes it very clear. The Genesis 6 account. These are not the sons of Seth and the holy righteous sons of Seth and the hoochie mamas of Cain. These are the fallen angels having sex with the women, creating a hybrid being known as the Nephilim. These are the giants. These are the reprobates. These are the ones that are chained. The fallen angels are chained in Tartarus. This is where Jesus goes and proclaims to them, no jailbreak, not getting out. I got the keys right here. But yeah, the Book of Enoch, Enoch 1, R.H. Charles is the edition you want to get. R.H. Charles. R.H. Charles, the Book of Enoch. It opens up scripture, and it all goes back to the Genesis 3:15 narrative. That's what it does. Everything goes back. The seed of a dragon will be at war at enmity with the seed of the woman. The proto-evangelium, the one coming from the seed of the woman, will crush the dragon's head. And of course, the proto-evangelium is the Messiah. So it's the whole Bible. It's the whole thing right there in, a couple of lines. Genesis 3:15.
Yeah, it's amazing, and for the audience that might say, well, that's an apocryphal book. A few things to keep in mind: the authors of the Bible, New Testament and Old, both quoted from the Book of Enoch. And not only did they quote from it, but they didn't quote from it in such a way that they had to teach people what this was.
They knew.
Yeah, they knew. This is something that was obviously in the common knowledge of the people at that time.
I agree. Very much so.
Also in the Qumran, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I went to Jerusalem, and my tour guide was an archaeologist that discovered one of the Dead Sea Scroll caves.
Wow.
And was attributed with that. But so we went to the Dead Sea. I swam in the water and everything.
I did too. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. So it's got so much salt you don't sink. You can just float. But that said, people don't have a concept today of exegesis and what things were like back then, as opposed to our view of what things are like today. But that said, scrolls were very difficult to write out, and it was very time consuming. So there wasn't a lot of copies of books. However, they found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls one of the most prolific recopied scrolls that almost everyone had a copy of was the Book of Enoch.
That's another one, right?
So that gives it huge credibility. And another thing too is people argue, well, it's not canon, but there is one case. The Ethiopian church has had it as a part of their canon from the very first time of the Bible all the way to this day. So you can make an argument with that, but you don't even need to go there. So
yeah, the Ethiopian Bible, the Book of Enoch precedes the Book of Genesis. And you're right. That's been that way forever. And this is the deal that people don't get. What are we looking at here? So when people get all in a tough King James only, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like the bottom line is which translation. If I'm really digging into something, I'll read all translations.
That's what I do. I try to do.
Read everything. Blue letter Bible, click.
I've got a set of several different translations. I find some are better in some areas, some are not.
Yeah, I agree.
And here's something else people have to understand. In order for you to publish a book today, it can't be an exact copy of other things. It's got to have some degree of difference. And I'm sure that plays into it when there are some translations that are being done as well, So that's something else to consider. But yeah, I also refer back to the Septuagint, where the original writing says that God in Isaiah 13, God's going to send giants to punish his people for their sins.
No, that's pretty intense.
That's hugely intense.
Yeah, very.
And Jerome in the Latin Vulgate changed that to mighty men.
Right.
And then you see many references to mighty men in the Old Testament, including, look, what about the mighty men of Moab, the lion-faced men?
Lion men, right.
The lion men of Moab.
Yeah.
And these they approached King David, and David says, "Are you here as my friend or as my enemy?" And they said, "We heard that you serve the one true living God, and we're here to fight with you." And they fought with David against other Nephilim. And by the way, I think there's a prophecy about that I believe that plays out in the future that involves them.
And I agree. We'll see. You know, it's see the world has just taken with the advent of Darwinism and just taken the supernatural and just squashed it completely.
Right.
Just boom. There is no supernatural, no miracles, no God of the Bible. You send your kid to college, and he's a Christian when he goes in, and then by the spring, he's agnostic or atheistic, and more than likely, you know, one of the LGBTQ categories.
He's a communist.
Yeah,
I had a cousin of mine that went to UT in Texas, and I said, "Listen," I said, "you know, college now isn't what it used to be,
no, it's
and
not.
now it's indoctrination.
You're indoctrinated.
You're being indoctrinated into all kinds of things, especially communism and socialism,
Yeah,
which is completely un-American." And I said, "So be careful of that." He calls me up when he gets out of college and says, "I graduated." I said, "Good. You stay away from all that communism and socialism indoctrination." He's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Great." He says, "But capitalism has to go. It's gotta be changed." I was like, "Oh, they got you.
Here we go. They got you.
They got you."
And replace it with what?
Right.
I mean, what people don't understand, and this is going to sound like a racist rant, but it's not. Okay. In America, for the first time in world history, men and women had the ability, the time, and liberty to create. It wasn't here because of the feudal system, the Middle Ages, and all this other stuff. You know, royalty and serfs. No royalty in America. Level playing field. Thank you for the most part. And if you wanted to do something, you could do it. So Orville and Wilbur Wright have a bicycle shop. And they're kind of going like, you know, I think men can fly. And they get together on Saturdays and at night, and they create this bird. And it flies. And that's the advent of the modern world. But coupled with that, the automobile, the telegraph, indoor plumbing. I mean, you look at the modern era, the skyscraper, mass production, the thermostat, indoor heating and air conditioning, refrigeration, the telephone. I mean, the railroad system, air travel. This is all in the last, 120 years. This is it. And where it came from, most of it came from America, most of it, or from a Eurocentric worldview. That's where it came from. And it sounds like an incredible racist rant. What did Mexico and South America contribute? What did Africa contribute? What did the Arab countries in the Middle East contribute? What did the Chinese contribute? Just look down the lists of inventions, which we all take for granted in the modern era, and it's Eurocentric. But now we're told that it's bad. We're not supposed to do that, that we're racist if we say something. No, we're not. What they don't understand, the reason why this happened, for the first time in history, men and women had liberty to do what they wanted to do. And that had never happened for thousands of years. And from that spawned the modern era where we are now.
Plus, with capitalism, you have competing organizations that have to try to outdo each other. So that breeds more innovation. Yeah, under communism, you don't have that kind of system.
The whole system, 65 million to 75 million people perish in the gulags of the former Soviet Union. That's the first thing. The second thing is it didn't work. After what, it was at 80 years or 70 years or whatever it is, the whole thing just collapsed of its own weight. It doesn't work. There's no incentive. People
it doesn't work.
And this is the deal. I can always tell someone that owns something. Like when you go into a restaurant and the service might be a little sluggish, and all of a sudden there's a guy up here going, "Sir, I'm really sorry about this. We're having a little backup in the kitchen. We're going to give you some free food, hors d'oeuvres, while we're waiting. We had a little emergency. One of the sinks got clogged up," or whatever. That's the owner. That's the owner. Why does he care? Because it's his money. He's invested. But when you go into places where there's no ownership, Nobody cares. A perfect example is the building department. And it doesn't matter which building department it is. It's public dole. They're there. They work 40 or 50 hours a week. Wherever they hustle to the counter, they don't care. They're going to get paid the same amount whether they care for you. We sat in the building department building for 45 minutes before somebody finally came out and waited on us. There was only one other person ahead of us. Nobody was there. One other person at the counter. 45 minutes for some guy to come out and tell me, oh, you can't dig into your own property 2 feet without a grading permit, geological survey, fire. I mean, the agencies, it would be $20,000 to sink an above ground pool. That's all I wanted to do. No, you can't do that.
Or you got to hire the union.
Well, it's California. I hate to say it, but I've been told you're now 3 years. If you want to put a pool in your backyard, 3 years.
Wow.
3 years to get a pool permit. 3 years. And this is why it doesn't work. There's no incentive to get your permit out, but do anything. You turn that into the private sector, woohoo, watch things happen.
Right.
Don't even do that because it's all about control.
When I was living in Los Angeles, I remember hearing on the radio one morning, they said, yeah, there's 900 new laws that we have to follow in California.
What are they? We don't know.
Yeah. I tell my friends, get out of communist LA.
I love it here. We're deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains. Oh, I love the climate, although I don't like the 5 days of continuous rain, but it's snowing up at Mountain High. Yeah. And that's my local ski resort. I will be going up on Thursday morning.
Nice.
Say anything.
Right.
But, I don't like the politics here. And they're not working and they never will work. So
and they're only one-sided. America's never meant to be one-sided.
Yeah. But
it doesn't work.
They control the legislature. They've controlled it for years, and the state's gone like this. We are billions of dollars in debt. And no way out. But keep taxing us to death, whatever you do.
Well, that's their solution to everything. Tax.
I got to go in like 5 minutes. So
okay,
you wrap us up.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I wanted to mention is a lot of times people that even study the subject, they don't realize that not only did you have the fallen angels that created the Nephilim, the giants, the demigods, mirroring Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, but the Nephilim created a third race, which was the Chimera, which was the mixing of human and animal DNA, which spawned an entirely another race. And I do believe that what we're going to see now with what's going on is not only the return of the Nephilim and fallen angels to a degree, but we're also going to see the return of the Chimera.
And we already are.
There's nightmare creatures
right there behind you. Yeah.
That people are saying that they're seeing that are like part human, part animal.
Yeah, and I think Sasquatch is a modern day Nephilim.
Yep, that's my personal theory. When they've done tests on them, they find that it's part human, part other animal DNA that they can't identify.
Yeah, that's Melba Ketchum. She's an amazing woman who's done an incredible job, and she's received a lot of flack. But boy, she sticks to her guns. And Melba, our hat is off to you, my dear.
Absolutely. So yeah, just spanning the course of time with these things and trying to get this information out to people. I would definitely encourage people to look into your books and read more about the subject. You've got so many and the videos on the different topics that this spawns into. Is there what would you say? And another important thing I would encourage people as far as looking at your videos, like you said earlier, on the trail of Nephilim, you actually go and investigate these things in person.
We're out of a library.
So you've held these things. You've seen these things where they are real and that they're not human. That the sagittal plate is different than a human being's.
Correct.
That the spine location connecting from the head to the spine is completely different. That the elongated skulls, that this is not just a deformation, but this is actually a different genetic being that is not
Correct.
human in any way.
Yeah, and that's why our it's number 6 in our ongoing on the trail of a Nephilim. It's the complete DNA results. I mean, this is what I mean. We're out of a library. It took us years to get legally the DNA out of Peru, but we did it legally. And I want to thank our donors who have always remained anonymous. but they gave us the money that enabled us not only to go down there, but to do all this DNA testing on all of these different samples. And Mondo
Right.
Gonzalez was our lead archaeologist. The late Richard Shaw filmed everything. Chase Klotsky tagged in bag of samples. I
Right.
was there, obviously, on film and assisting Mondo. But this was, groundbreaking. Up till recently, we're the only team that's ever gotten DNA out of these things until Gaia sent down 2 guys under the umbrella of Brian Forrester. They will not share their data where we have. We're an open book on this film. Here it is. This is what the data said.
And there is a conspiracy to cover this up. I try to tell people in the 1800s, there were hundreds of articles of people finding giants and skeletons, and the Smithsonian Institute disappears them. But one last thing I wanted to bring up with you was, can you tell us, you broke the story about the Giant of Kandahar, which has become hugely famous to the public, and of course in the military and in the army. And I interview a lot of soldiers, and it's something they always bring up. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did with that?
Well, once again, it's there. It is. It's boots on the ground. We interviewed this man we call the Shooter, and he appeared on a radio program with the late Richard Shaw. And one thing led to another when the show was over, because the host kept this man on. And Richard called me, "You got to call this guy." So I did. And I called him several times. We spoke numerous times together. And before we brought him out to Los Angeles to interview him. And since then, I have had other people vet the story. It's real. In fact, on my show recently, there was a man whose his father grew up in Kandahar. His grandmother was a witch.
Oh, wow.
She knows the cave. She would bring live animals and chain them near the cave.
Yep.
I mean, it's real. People can, squawk all they want. All these people do is they go on the internet, they look up some stories. We're talking to witnesses. We didn't go to Kandahar, but we're talking to people who were there, who were involved in it. And that's what real, investigative journalism is. You got to get out of a library. The library is good for the primer, but you got to get out of the library.
And quickly, what did he tell you that he saw, that he experienced there?
That's one of the the giant comes out of the cave and he impales one of the soldiers, and the soldier is still alive. And that's when the shooter goes, "Shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head." And they do. They shoot him in the head, and he's basically decapitated, falls to the ground, and then he's carted away. That's from Steve Quayle. That's a completely different giant in a different area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when they carted him away, what is it? Was it in a
Huey, just like that? Yeah. Yeah.
I used to jump out of those in airborne operations, by the way. Yeah, they're cargo vehicles and troop supports. They can handle heavy cargo.
Yeah.
So and this thing was taken to an undisclosed location. I also heard later testimony from one of the pilots that flew that thing. And then there was another testimony I heard last year from someone on a base that said that creature was brought to that base. And so just more and more collaboration. I interviewed a guy on my show before in here where he said that he was working over there, and he said he noticed that the locals were taking all their goats and bringing them inside the house at night and would leave one chained up outside. And they thought this was very odd, and they asked why, and they said because these giants come down from the mountains, and if they leave that one, they leave the rest of them alone.
Yeah, that's what the woman who was a sorcerer or witch, and I spoke to the grandson of this woman, and that's what they would do. She would lead the goat out and tie it up by the cave, and that's the same cave where the giant came out of.
And the giant had 2 rows of teeth, had 6 fingers, 6 toes,
red hair,
and had red hair, which is a complete perfect description out of the Old Testament Nephilim.
Yeah, and we don't know how old it is. See, what if it's 3,000 years old? There's no way to tell.
Right.
In my opinion, because of the stench, I think that thing might have been that old. I really do.
And not only that, but there's many, many other sightings and cases that people are claiming and saying that they're discovering. They're also saying the government's jumping on these things, wrapping them up and bringing them to underground facilities.
They are.
And in one of my other shows, I actually interviewed a man who did security for an underground base. And he said they showed him a 20-foot giant in a cage. And he said they specifically called him a Nephilim.
Wow.
I had that in one of my earlier episodes. So you can check out that story if you'd like. But LA, thank you so much for coming on. I won't hold you up anymore. I certainly appreciate your time and consideration in coming on. And I hope everything goes well for your projects and what you're working on.
You.
And
Appreciate it.
this new book you're doing, and of course, spreading Christ as the solution to all of this, which all this is just proven biblical history.
Yes, amen to that. Amen.
And
to that.
Darwinism's trying to keep it hidden. And the reason they don't want us to know about these things is because they don't want us to know that the Bible and Jesus is real. In this crazy, insane world of atheism and communism, which denies all that.
Yep, I agree.
But thank you, and thank you to the audience and everybody. You can reach L.A. Marzulli at what?
LAMarzulli.net.
.net.
There are videos to stream, streaming.lamarzulli.net, streaming.lamarzulli.net.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Goodbye to everybody on the show.